welcome to the College Football Breakdown Show. This is the preview for Week 16. These are my DFS picks for the DraftKings main slate on Saturday, the 19th of December. I just made a preview video for the 4-game slate on Friday, so go ahead and check that out. I'll link that to this video as well down below. This is YonkersCFB at YonkersCFB on Twitter. This is brought to you by thebreakdownsports.com. Go ahead and check us out. We've got a lot of content going on with NBA picking up and with NFL rolling along, college football in full swing. A lot to get to. So let's hit it. First game, Texas A&M versus Tennessee. Interested in Texas A&M here. They're facing a Tennessee defense allowing 5.8 yards per play, whereas A&M's offense has a very robust 6.4 yards per play on the season. I think Kellen Mond is fine. There's been a knock against him in his career that he can't compete in road games, but he's been just fine in road games this year. He's actually been better on the road than at home. The rushing upside, he hasn't been running quite as much as I guess he usually would, so that's not fantastic. I would say there seems to be kind of a narrative going on here that Tennessee has like new life for this year. I saw some of that going on online because they're coming off a win, and I don't really understand that. They beat Vanderbilt. Even Tennessee's kicker opted out for the year, so I really don't know what their motivation is. A&M should be highly motivated for this one as they still have a shot at making the playoffs. I don't think they will, but they have a shot. The running back, Isaiah Spiller, has to be within consideration at 7.1. That's not too bad of a price. He does have 6 100-yard rushing games this year, and he's been pretty consistent. At wide receiver, their tight end, Jalen Weidermeyer, is their top target. He does have 19 targets in their last 2 games. Other than that, Lane, Jones, are there other guys at the wide receiver position, but Ainias Smith is really the second guy, and he gets carries as well. I think the running game with Spiller is going to be mostly where I target this one. A&M's running for about 200 yards per game, so hard not to have interest there. As far as Tennessee, it's just been a revolving door offensively at the quarterback position. They're going against a pretty good Texas A&M defense. Harrison Bailey started and saw most of the snaps, but he's expected to split time once again with JT Shrout, so no interest there. If you're looking for a wide receiver, Velus Jones has 16 targets in his last 2 at 4.8. That's a decent price. Other than that, I got to keep an eye on. I'm not sure I'll get there, but Jalen Hyatt, pretty talented freshman. He's come on as of late. There's a chance he finishes strong here. He does have 9 catches in his last 2 games. Josh Palmer is the other guy. He started the year as their main guy, but he's kind of slowly decreased his production. Eric Gray and Ty Chandler are splitting carries back here. Gray has 25 carries in his last 2 games, and Chandler has 21. So while Gray has been more productive, there's a little bit of a split going on here, so I'm not sure I'm going to pay up for Gray. Regarding this Texas A&M defense, they're very good against the rush. They've only allowed 1 back to go for 100 yards on this season, and that was Rakeem Boyd. Famously held Mississippi State to -2 rushing yards for the entire game when they met. I know it's Mississippi State. However, Auburn was able to move the ball against them. They ran for 196 yards on 30 carries. So maybe Tennessee runs the ball a little bit here. If they do, it's probably going to be Gray and Chandler gets some looks, but I'm not super interested. All right, moving on. Northwestern versus Ohio State. It's worth keeping a look on this one. Ohio State is expected to be without some of their players. There was a quote going around. I saw journalists say, quote unquote, some bad news leaking from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. At least one very prominent starter on the offense and several others have tested positive and will miss Saturday's Big Ten title game. We don't know who one prominent starter is. Is it Justin Fields? Is it Olave? Who knows? So that's something to keep an eye on. It's kind of hard to give an overview of this game with that going on. I will say I didn't give my disclaimer at the beginning of the video. If you're not used to playing fantasy college football, you have to be checking your phone constantly because there's such late inactive news, especially with COVID and the journalists not being there. You may not get the news until right before kick. So especially like 8:15 to 9 o'clock. I'm on the West Coast. So right before those initial games kick off, you have to be staring at your phone. Same goes for the afternoon. Same goes for the late games. You have to be following these writers on Twitter. I make a list of prominent beat writers and other fantasy enthusiasts and whatnot. So that information usually gets out there, but sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes you don't know right before kick. So this week especially, there's been a lot of NFL draft opt-outs. We'll talk about some of those later with the Ole Miss, but something to keep an eye on. Okay, as far as Northwestern, it's not really much I'm going to be interested in offensively. They're a bad team offensively. I'm not really interested in this game much at all because Northwestern is good defensively, bad offensively. They're 99th in S&P Plus offensively. They only have 351 total yards per game. If you really want to attack the running game, I don't. But Cam Porter has come on strong at 5.7K. He had 24 carries for 142 yards and a touchdown last week. Northwestern has been looking for somebody to take over the lead back role, and it seems like that's probably him. Peyton Ramsey's their quarterback at 5.5. He can run a little bit. So anytime you see a guy that cheap who can run a little bit, maybe he stumbles into a rushing touchdown. They're going to be playing from behind. Maybe he's throwing. Not the worst look, but not where I'm going to go. As far as wide receiver, this guy, I'm not going to pronounce his name, so I'm just going to call him Bowman. He's been their top guy for most of the year. He had 24 targets in his last 2 games that he played in. I saw a blank for him in the stat sheet last week. I don't know what happened. I don't know if he played. I'm assuming he didn't. And I didn't see any news regarding his status this week, so I think he's going to play. He's been their top guy when he has played. Other than that, this guy McGowan at 4.8. I'm probably not going to get there with any Northwestern guy, but he does have double digits in 4 of his last 6 games. All right, as far as Ohio State goes, you probably know these guys by now. I'm honestly not going to spend much time on them. Justin Fields at 9.8. He is who he is. Northwestern's defense is pretty good, though, going over some of their stats. They're ranked in the top 5 against the pass, against the run, and overall total defense and in scoring defense. They're allowing only 313 total yards per game and 4.5 yards per play. While those are super impressive stats, and while I do think they could have a good defense, you go ahead and take a look at the teams that they have played. Go take a look. It is stinky. Vintage Big Ten. They haven't played anyone who's even in the same stratosphere as Ohio State. I would say the 2 best offenses they've played are Purdue and Iowa. Iowa can't throw the ball, especially back when they played in the beginning of the year. Couldn't throw the ball at all. And Purdue has an okay offense, and that's by far the best offense they played. So, atrocious. Ohio State will score here, but I doubt they get to 50. I don't find this game very interesting. Wilson and Olave are the 2 top options. Olave did see 12 targets to Wilson's 4 last game, but I think that's probably an aberration because in every other game, it's been pretty even split, and Garrett Wilson has been the more productive wide receiver. They're both fine. If it's one of these guys who has COVID behind them, it's really taking a flyer. Ruckert, their tight end, might see a few more targets, but he's kind of a crapshoot. They really don't target him much in his offense. Smith and Giba might be the way I look. He might start if one of those 2 guys misses with COVID, but again, it's just kind of guessing at this point. As far as running back, Master Teague is fairly cheap for an offense this good. I understand why going against Northwestern defense, but he's fine. He's been pretty consistent, except for his dud last week. Other than that, he's been extremely consistent. Not much to say about him. Trey Sermon, he was very good to me that 1 week. 4.9, I'd like to see him cheaper. I was playing him when he was 3.5, when he's 4.9. Not sure how I feel about that, but he does get about 10 rushes per game for a team that's favored by 20 points. Okay, moving on. I have nothing betting-wise in those first 2 games, by the way. Oklahoma versus Iowa State. I'm really excited to watch this game. I don't have a ton of fantasy interest, but great game, I think. I'm looking forward to a great game. It's 5.5 point favorites to Oklahoma. They played in the beginning of the year, and Iowa State came away with the victory. I do remember watching that game and watching the film of that one, and Oklahoma looked like the better team to me for about 75-80% of that game. Some freshman mistakes from Rattler, and some big runs from Breece Hall in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter, and that was the ball game. But Oklahoma was better for most of it. I'm not giving any excuses. They lost the game, but hard for me to take Iowa State in this one with that being the fact of the case. Now, when you look at it from a macro perspective, They already played once head-to-head, and Iowa State won. Motivation edge. They're probably both motivated, but Oklahoma's been there, done that, and this is Iowa State's best chance at winning a Big 12 championship in how long? All I have to do is win one game, and it's there. So perhaps motivation edge Iowa, if anything, a wash. Coaching edge, they're two great coaches, maybe slightly the Lincoln Riley. It's just I don't really see much. I don't really see any way I could take Oklahoma here. While I do think they're probably the better team, I don't really see any reason to go against Iowa State. They've been very consistent. Both teams have been on a roll, although mostly against bad competition. Oklahoma had some struggles against Baylor their last time out, but they still won the ball game. Let me get to the DFS. I got a little bit on a roll there. Sorry about that. Spencer Rattler at 8.1. I mean, you know who he is. I think he's fine. He runs the ball a little bit, but not a ton. I'd like to see more of that from him. He's been kind of gimpy. Iowa State, I think this one probably goes under. It's worth mentioning the weather. Make sure you're monitoring the weather if you're playing this one. I checked two different sites. One had a 60% chance of rain. The other one had an 80% chance of rain. Looked pretty cold. I didn't really see any wind, but something to monitor. As far as wide receivers on Oklahoma, I don't play their wide receivers. I think if I played one, it'd be MIZZ at 5,000. He's been an impact player for them as a true freshman. He leads the team with 482 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. Deep play guy, 16.62 yards per reception, so there's a chance he catches a big one. But his production's really hasn't been great lately. 1 catch for -1 yard last game, and I mean look at that, he barely goes over double digits once in their last 4 games, and he's done it barely twice. So nothing super exciting there. I will say the offense should. I'm expecting it to run through Ramondre Stevenson, the running back. He was suspended the last time these two teams played. Pledger does see some carries behind him at 3.7, perhaps a little too cheap. But, I mean, they're going against a good defense. It is worth noting that Stevenson actually has the most targets on this team in the last 2 games. So I think he's going to be the guy. He's been the guy they needed early on in the year, and now they got him back. As far as Iowa State, I mean, it all starts with Breece Hall, right? He's been remarkably consistent. He actually has at least 91 rushing yards and a touchdown in every single game so far this year. Like I said, against Oklahoma last time out, man, they did pretty well against him for most of the game, and then he just broke a few big runs, and that was that. Ended up with 30 fantasy points. It looked like he was having a bad game, and he's just found a way to get it done. Oklahoma's defense has been much improved lately, so that's something to keep an eye on. Overall, I'm not going to have a ton of interest. Brock Purdy at 7,000 has a decent price. His clear top option is Xavier Hutchinson. But if there's any bad weather in this game, I don't know. And he has had 2 duds in his last 4 games. Sean Shaw has come on a little bit, 5 targets and then 4 targets, but the volume's not great. Charlie Kohler, if you need price saving, he's been a price saving option all year long. He's been consistently getting double digits. What's not to love, but the upside's really not great. He's a lineup filler, if anything. Tariq Milton. He's been in some of my lineups as a punt play. He came back. Many thought he'd be the leading receiver going into the year. He came back and had 6 catches for 32 yards. Not much, but 9 points as a 3.5 option. Could do worse. And then he had a dud last game. I don't even know if he played last game. I haven't seen that, and I didn't see much news. Maybe just nobody cares. It would be nice to know, but I haven't seen anything worth monitoring. But I think they're just kind of spreading the targets out a little bit too much for my liking. When it was concentrated with just Hutchinson and Kohler, like it was for a little bit there in the middle of the year, I like that, but now too difficult to tell. All right, FSU versus Wake. This is one we should have some interest in. There's a 66-point total. I played a lot of Florida State last week. I played a lot of Wake last week too, although that was hit or miss. Beal Smith killed me last week. He was pretty much a lock, and he just did not do anything. So, but we have to go back to the well here in this one. Starting with Florida State offensively. They should have success here. Wake's defense is no bueno. 456 yards per game allowed, 6.1 yards per play, especially beatable in the run, 191 rush yards per game. Or actually, they've been worse against the pass, which is surprising, giving up 191 rushing yards. However, Florida State wants to run the ball. Jashaun Corbin has come on strong ever since LaDamian Webb announced he's leaving the program. He was splitting carries with him. He's taken off in the last two. He actually has 30 carries for 149 yards and 4 touchdowns in that span in 5 catches. So at 6.1, I think going back to the well is not the worst idea. It's not exactly a home run play since the volume, they spread it out between him, Tofili, and then Jordan Travis, their running back, gets a ton of rushing work. So the volume's not fantastic, but it's certainly a good spot for him here. Tofili is also within play. The volume is not great at all, but you would expect that would probably go up given how productive he's been. He has 13 carries for 193 yards and a touchdown over his last 2, and he saw a few catches last game as well. Jordan Travis, I played a lot of him last week, and he was pretty good. I've played him in spots. The difficult thing with Travis is the passing numbers are not great. That was his first time he had a multi-passing touchdown performance all year, I believe. So you really need for him to be perfect on the ground, which he's been pretty darn dangerous in the ground, and he faces a weak Wake Forest defense. So maybe that happens, and he gets a decent price here as well. I'm more likely to play Hartman on the other side, but Travis is worth mentioning once again. As far as Wake, I feel like I played Wake a ton this year because they're just too cheap week in and week out. I'll probably play a lot of them here as well. They're playing Florida State defense. That's dreadful, allowing 456 yards per game as well. So both defenses allowing the same amount, but they're allowing 6.5 yards per play. That's really bad, man. That's really, really bad. That's up there with Minnesota's. Some of the worst you'll see. Minnesota's at 6.6. They allow 199 rushing yards per game at a 5.1 yards per carry clip. So I will go back to the well with Beal Smith. He wasn't great last week, but I mean, I would have to think that's an aberration. I'll play some of him. I'm not going to lock him up again like I did last week. I learned my lesson. But, with Kenneth Walker the third opting out, that leaves a ton of touches for Beal Smith in a game that should be high scoring, in a game they're favored by a touchdown. Other than that, Ellison, their backup running back, looks like he's going to see some carries. He saw 9 last week and was pretty productive. He looks better than Beal Smith. So a 3.9 perhaps. Wake is scoring 37 points per game on the season. That's 20th in the nation. So they're a team you're going to want. Like I said, I feel like I've been forced into playing them, but they've been pretty good. Sam Hartman, the quarterback, I'll have some shares as well. In his 2 games against Florida State in his career, he has 535 passing yards and 5 touchdowns, so not bad. And he's been playing a lot better as of late. The first couple games, they didn't even really have to throw the ball at all. Then he had a huge game against UNC, 44 points. But last week against Louisville, it felt like he should have had a bigger game, and their offense just completely bit the dust. So that's one reason I'm going to rein in the horses a little bit. I don't want all my eggs in the Wake Forest basket again, because they looked bad last week. It could be they were rusty because they haven't played in forever, but they were really bad, man. They only scored 21 points against a bad Louisville defense. If you're going to the wide receivers, you have to be looking at Roberson at 7,000. That's a bit pricey, but he deserves to be that high for sure. He has 30 targets over his last 2 games. In his last 3 games, he has gone for 28 catches, 435 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So he's a stud. If you can't pay up that high, Donovan Green at 5.8 is where you should look. He does have 19 targets over his last 2 games, 12 catches for 226 yards and 2 touchdowns in that span. He is probable to play after he missed last week. A.T. Perry all the way down at 3.2. He saw 7 targets last week. For a 3.2 guy, that's not bad. He's an outside option. He may see slightly less playing time now that Donovan Green's coming back. They rotate a little bit. But, hey, that's cheap. He only had 1 catch with those 7 targets and did nothing, but worth mentioning. Morin is the slot guy at 4.2. He's fine. Nothing super exciting, not huge upside, but fine. All right, Washington State versus Utah. So this line's at 10.5 favored to Utah. At first, I'm tempted to take Washington State because I do think they're underrated in the betting market. I think they're a pretty solid team. They've had some pretty good performances. They haven't played a whole lot of football, but I think they've only played 3 games. They did lose pretty badly to USC, but USC is a good team. And Washington State, they had a lot of turnovers in that game. If there weren't turnovers, I think that'd probably be another close game. So that was my initial lean. But then, you do some old school handicapping in this one. And you got Rolovich, the former Hawaii coach, going into Salt Lake City, Utah in December. It's supposed to be cold. Looks like there's a high of 37 for the day. and you got a freshman quarterback on the road against Utah as well, which is usually a spot you don't want to play. So it's tricky in this one. I could see this one going a number of ways. I don't love either team, but I think there's some decent fantasy spots here. Jaden DeLora, the freshman quarterback, he's had 2 very good games and 1 absolutely dreadful game. I think he didn't even have a point. He had like 0.6 points in his last outing against USC. So he's risky. He is a talented kid, but he's risky. As far as the running back position, Deion McIntosh has been pretty good this year while filling in, but I think his high in carries this year has been like 18 or 16. Doesn't quite see an amazing amount of touches, and Utah's rush defense is much better than their pass defense. Utah usually has a very good defense, but I had them circled this year to take a step back, and it looked like they might be. Their rush defense is still great, allowing only 106 yards per game at 3.7 yards per rush. But their passing game, I mean, they lost a lot of guys to the NFL. I think they lost 3 guys who got drafted in the secondary alone, which for a school like Utah is a little bit more difficult to plug and play. They coach them up well, but it takes a little while. They're allowing 251 passing yards per game. We just saw Jerry Rice's kid with that nice long touchdown for Colorado last week. So I think Washington State's going to throw the ball a little bit here. A lot of that depends on the health of Max Borghi. I assume he's not playing. I don't really know why he'd play right now. I'm assuming he's going to the NFL, but like he hasn't officially opted out. He was supposed to be trying to play. I think he was even dressed and warming up last game. So if he plays at 5.6, I mean, this guy's a stud, but he's in a new offense. Most of his fantasy relevance came from being in the Mike Leach air raid offense last year. This year, it's quite different. Run and shoot usually doesn't target the running backs out of the backfield. He's a total wild card, but he's very good NFL. Very good running back, probably an NFL running back at 5.6. Worth mentioning. The wide receivers here are interesting. So Bell's been the guy with the most targets. He has 10 or more targets in each game. And his last 2 games, he has 21 catches for 234 yards and 2 touchdowns. So pretty consistent there. He's more expensive than I would like. I don't know if I can get there. Bell's down at 6.4. So I think I might be able to get to Bell. I'd like to get to Harris. I think he's the best wide receiver they have. He's been the most productive. He does have 26 targets in their 3 games. But that's pricey. You're definitely paying a premium. If you need a salary relief option, I might go to Jameer Calvin at 3.3. He has 21 targets in 3 games, which is pretty damn good. The targets have been very consolidated between those 3, and they're facing a beatable Utah pass defense. Now, like I said, there's a lot of risk here with the cold. Calvin's done nothing with the targets he's gotten, so that's also another risk. But I definitely think you can look through this passing game a little bit here. All right, as far as Utah, I think their passing game is going to be slightly, I don't know if I call it popular actually, but I think it's easy to talk yourself into this Utah passing offense. I'm not exactly sure I'm going to get there with you. Jake Bentley just hasn't been great, and in a game where they're favored by 10.5, they're probably going to look to run the ball, man. I don't really think they're going to look to throw the ball. On the season, they've actually attempted 154 runs to only 116 passes. So I think they're going to run the ball if they can, and Vegas thinks they can. So, but Bentley is a little cheap going against a Washington defense that's just okay. If you're looking at any of his receiving options, Britton Covey is the top guy. Seems like he's been in college football forever, and apparently he could have 2 more years of eligibility if he wants to, since this year doesn't count. Anyway, he does have 13 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns over his last 2. Been very productive. He did have 11 targets last week. I don't know if I would expect that to continue. He's definitely not a big play guy. They like to give him jet sweeps. They like to give him short passes. He's okay. He's fine, but nothing super interesting there. Where I'm going to look to for salary relief is Brant Kuithe. He's been too cheap all year. He hasn't had a huge game, but he does have double-digit targets in 2 of his 4 games. Utah's played 4 games. He has double-digit targets as a tight end. In half of those games, he gets some carries out of the backfield every now and then. He had a few rushing touchdowns last year. I don't think he has one yet this year, but he's going to get one eventually, I would imagine. So Kuithe is where I would look. Other than that, not much interest. All right, Louisiana versus Coastal Carolina. I'll definitely be watching this game. Don't have a ton of fantasy interests. I'm actually not going to play any Louisiana Lafayette. Lacey is their top receiver, but they spread the ball out just a ton if you need to play him at 4.5. And Levi Lewis is worth mentioning. He had a decent game. These 2 teams played. Coastal won 30-27. He had a decent game, but you can see there his attempts really aren't great. He did have manage 24 points last time these two teams played, so at 6.5 he could do worse. I generally think this game's probably going to go under a little bit. I think it's going to be a ball possession kind of game. So I'm not going to take too much time talking about Louisiana. Their running backs, these guys all get work. Mitchell, Regis, and Smith. Mitchell's not getting enough work for me to go to him at 6.5. Smith gets some carries at 3.2 if you absolutely need a punt, but that's pretty dicey. All right, Coastal. The main interest has to be in CJ Marable. He has 136 rushing yards per game over his last 3. He's been dominating lately. 7 rush TDs in that span and a receiving TD, so he's just been on an absolute tear. He's really expensive. Louisiana's rush D is okay, but not fantastic. They're beatable. They're allowing 180 rush yards per game and 4.2 yards per carry, so some interest there. I think Grayson McCall is a little too expensive for my liking in a game that may see some scoring, may not. It's hard to tell. He really doesn't see very many attempts at all. He's been very efficient with those attempts, and he runs a little bit, but I don't see how you can pay up there for Grayson McCall. Passing game, I probably can't get too highly because he had 13 targets last game, but he laid a goose egg before that against BYU. So goose egg to 11 for 138 and 2 in a team that doesn't pass the ball very much. I think his price is decent at 6.6. I probably can't get there. If you're looking to pay down, and I probably will have some shares of Isaiah Likely. He's their tight end. He's a pretty darn good tight end. He doesn't see like a ton of targets or anything, but he's pretty efficient. Sees some touchdowns. He's been pretty effective. So at 4,000, you can certainly do worse there. All right, moving right along. Okay, this one, holy hell. A lot to talk about here. LSU versus Ole Miss. Okay, the big news, Elijah Moore, the top 2 targets for Ole Miss, Elijah Moore and Kenny Yeboah, are not going to play in this game. They both posted on Twitter right before I started recording, like literally right before, that they're both going to enter the NFL draft. I don't think they explicitly said they're not playing in this game, so I guess there's a chance they play in this game and then enter the NFL draft, but it didn't look like that way to me at all. Reading Moore's tweet, he was saying goodbye to everybody and thank you, so I'd imagine they're both going to be out. I don't really see what they have to play for here anyway. And that really shakes things up. So this one was already the most interesting game on the slate because it featured a massive total of 77.5. I just placed a few bucks on the under, just a few bucks, nothing crazy. Once I saw the news that Moore and Yeboah were out, because Moore has been this team's pretty much entire offense through the air, so I had to out of principle. It's still a game that we should be interested in DFS, however, because these are 2 really bad defenses. It is worth mentioning it's supposed to be a little bit cold and rainy. That's something worth monitoring. I didn't see any bad wind or anything like that, but keep an eye out on this one for sure. If you're playing the game, there's a chance it could get nasty. Ole Miss hasn't played in 3 weeks, and they have 2 games since Halloween, so they could be a little rusty here, and they're going to be missing their 2 top wide receiving options. However, LSU, they beat Florida last week. Congratulations, it was cool, but I don't think that's sustainable. They only had about 50 players on the roster for that game, and 26 of them were freshmen or sophomores, so heck of an accomplishment, but probably not sustainable. They gave up 609 total yards and came up with a win. There were some turnovers and all that. I would think Lane Kiffin would like to make statements here. I would think he'd have his team playing hard, but again, it's such a weird freaking game. This one is just insane. As far as LSU, we'll start with them. I'd have some interest in their quarterback, Max Johnson, at 6.8K. He's going against this Ole Miss defense that, they're allowing 310 passing yards per game. If you don't know by now, one of the worst defenses in all of college football. So I think he's interesting. He had 18 rush attempts last game against Florida. Only had 52 yards, but you like to see those attempts. He's a dual threat. He did have 239 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. So you have to be interested anytime somebody's playing Ole Miss. Keyshawn Boot at 5.7. He's probably going to be really chalky this week, but I'm going to play him because, holy crap, how can you not, unless the weather's too bad? Even then, I might. He has 13 catches for 219 yards and a touchdown in his last 2 games. The big news there is that that's since Terrace Marshall opted out, their target hog, main wide receiver. He was doing everything through the air for LSU, and then he opted out, and Boot has really emerged. He's a deep play threat, very fast guy. He has 21 targets in those 2 games since Marshall opted out. So I'll have a lot of him. Other than that, I'll probably play some Jenkins at 4.3. He seems to be emerging as the secondary option. If McMath plays, he missed last game. He might be there as well. But Jenkins did have seven targets last game, now that Marshall and Eric Gilbert opted out. So they had 2 pretty big opt-outs. They're 2 biggest receiving options up until that point. All right, Kirkland below that, minor interest as well. Anybody in this game should be within consideration, but he did nothing last game. If McMath plays, I'll have interest there as well. So Ole Miss, I mean, I was considering paying up for Corral, but now that it's going to be cold and rainy and he's missing his top options, I'm not really sure I could do that. I'm kind of, in a way, I might be glad that this happened because it was going to be difficult to fit Elijah Moore and Matt Corral in your lineups, even though they were probably going to be the 2 highest scoring guys at their position. So this one's a dice roll. I don't really know where I'm going to go with it yet. I would assume I'm not playing a ton of Corral with Moore out, but I'd definitely consider it still. I think you're going to need some interest in their secondary receiving options now that they are now their primary receiving options. Drummond and Mingo are the top 2 guys. Mingo's only 3.7. He's more of an outside guy. There's a chance he sees 10 targets in this one and has a huge game. And Drummond at 4.4, how could you not like it with the price? He's been very inconsistent. Well, he's been a little bit more consistent lately. Look at that, 3 double-digit games in a row. So I'll dig into if there's any tertiary options that are going to pique my interest, but right now I would say those 2 guys are definitely where my ownership's going to be. I'm going to look into Braylon Sanders because you can see there he has 3 straight double-digit games. Looks like he's a deep play threat, so I'm going to look into him. He looks, at first glance, he looks like a fine option as well. Oh, I missed the rushing attack somehow. Somehow I always do that. Hopefully I didn't do that for too many games up till now. LSU's, so worth monitoring here. John Emery Jr. got banged up last game, and then so did TDP. So Chris Curry got 17 carries out of the backfield. If he gets 17 carries here, man, against this Ole Miss defense, allowing 217 rush yards per game and 5.7 yards per rush, I would have a lot of Curry. So that's something to monitor. Usually these guys all split reps. If one of them's out, even if only one of them's out, man, they're going to split carries, but against Ole Miss, it doesn't really matter, so they're fine. If Emery plays, he probably sees the most rushes, but it's dicey. They've been rotating, so those guys are all fine. As far as Ole Miss, I will play. I definitely will play some of the backfield. I think Jarian Ely's fine. He's been seeing more carries. I thought him and Snoop Connor would rotate more than they have. Ely's definitely the number 1 guy. And like I said, Connor gets some touchdowns, but the rushes have been really low. The attempts have been in single digits, so he's always a possible cheap option. But I just realized I missed talking about the backfield of Utah. I'm going to have a lot of Ty Jordan, so let me go back here. Well, I don't know if I'm going to have a lot, but I want to have a lot. I haven't set that many lineups yet, so it depends on pricing, obviously. But with more opting out or potentially opting out, that piques my interest. So Ty Jordan, this freshman, this kid's impressive, man. Holy crap, I love watching this kid play. He's come out of nowhere and taken over the backfield. In the last 2 games, he has 44 rushes for 314 yards and 4 touchdowns. He has 4 receptions, too. He can catch the ball. He's been kind of splitting carries with Brumfield and Wilmore a little bit. But now Brumfield and Wilmore, apparently they both decided to enter the transfer portal. So now it's all Ty Jordan. I love it. How can you not love it? Bernard would be my guess. Micah Bernard to step in and see some carries as well. He had 5 carries last game. If you really need a minimum price guy, there you go. Okay. Mizzou and Mississippi State. This one is another really weird one. There's a lot pointing in Mississippi State's direction for me. Mizzou is supposed to be down to about 56 scholarship players for this one. Mississippi State, while they're 2-7, they've had the fifth hardest schedule of anybody in college football. And I think personally their quarterback, Will Rogers, has been looking better. He's been a true freshman. He's had a tough time in the SEC, but I think he's been coming along a little bit as of late. And I just think they match up well. They defend the run well, and Missouri wants to run. And Missouri can't defend the pass, and Mississippi State wants to pass. So it's a toss-up. These two teams stinks. I'm not sure I'm going to get to the window with it, but I think you have to be a little bit interested in Will Rogers. You know, it's risky. Their passing offense has been dreadful, and all they do is pass. But Missouri, their defense fallen off a cliff. They're giving up 400 yards per game, 6.0 yards per play, and 240 passing yards per game. Apparently, they're down to all freshmen at cornerback. They only have 3 scholarship corners. 2 of them are true freshmen. Those are the guys who are supposed to be starting. And they've been getting gashed lately, man. They've had a lot of injuries, a lot of opt-outs. It's not good. They gave up 48 points to Arkansas 2 games ago, and then most recently 49 points to Georgia. Mississippi State is not as good offensively as those teams, but, they're going to throw the ball. Will Rogers has opportunities. If they were a good running team, you would have to play their running back, but they never run the ball. Missouri has given up more than 600 yards on the ground over the last 2 games, getting absolutely gashed. But these guys don't run the ball. Marks actually leads the team in receptions, which is interesting. But he's been kind of splitting carries of late, and I think he's on kind of a downward trajectory. I think you could do worse than him at 4.5. The wide receiving options are a complete mess. It's the air raid. You never know who's going to go off, except for this freshman, Wally. Jaden Wally. He's been on a tear. I mean, you can check out that game log. He's been a monster. He has 26 targets over their last 2 games. He has really emerged. 100+ in each of his last 3 contests. 20+ DraftKings points in each of those. So I will have some of him. As far as Missouri, like I said, they want to run the ball. Larry Roundtree's going to get a lot of rushes, but he's usually not the most efficient back. He's been a lot more efficient this year. But Mississippi State's rush defense is that's the strength of their team. They're pretty average against the pass, but they're better against the run. They give up only 128 yards per game on the ground at 3.6 yards per rush. So Roundtree at 6.9, I'm not sure I'm going to play him. I think Ty Jordan is $100 more. Why not go to Ty Jordan? But there seem to be some Roundtree fans. Maybe it's just SEC bias, but he's actually had a really good year. After everybody talking him up, and then him doing nothing for a few years, you can see there his game log speak for himself. I mean, he had 40 points in back-to-back games. It's pretty impressive. Like I said, Mississippi State has a good rush defense, but the game script should be pretty good here. Well, actually, I take that back. It's kind of a toss-up, but there's definitely a chance. I mean, Mississippi State has lost their fair amount of ball games. There's a chance he gets like 30 rush attempts. Nobody would be surprised. Okay. So I guess I would say I'm not going to talk you off of him if you want to play him. Personally, I'm not going to play a ton of him. All right. Missouri side, I'm not going to play very much of them. Bazalek has a decent opportunity here, but he's only had 1 good game yet this year, and that was against LSU. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes for 20 points. So at 5.9, if I really need a punt option, I think I might look there, definitely, at Superflex. Other than that, their wide receiving options, Hazelton and Chisholm, are their top 2. I would prefer to go to Chisholm. He's been more consistent. However, Hazelton probably has more touchdown upside. I don't love the targets he's been getting, though. All right, Clemson versus Notre Dame. I'll try not to take too much time on this. I mean, this is the game of the weekend. It's a fantastic game. There was a lot of scoring last time out, but keep in mind it did go to overtime. Overall, I think Clemson's a little bit healthier, and Notre Dame is slightly less healthy. Notre Dame's supposed to be on possibly their 3rd string center, depending on the health of the 2nd string guy, which, offensive line is a huge part of their game. And Clemson's supposed to be healthier. Most notably, they have Trevor Lawrence back, star quarterback, but also defensively they get some guys back as well. So Travis Etienne, I'm not going to play Travis Etienne. Last time they met, Notre Dame, the rush defense is the reason their defense is as good as it is. They held ETN to, I believe it was 18 carries for 28 yards. As a team, they had 33 carries for 34 yards, so just got absolutely nothing going. But you can see, man, they've been using him a lot as a wide receiver as well. So he's going to be involved. I don't think I could pay up that much. My preferred option would be Clemson in the passing game. It's really difficult to tell how this game is going to match up. You know, last game they sold out to stop the run, and it really worked. They won the ball game. You would think they're going to use that same game plan here. However, you have to factor in that was with Trevor Lawrence was out and Clemson was playing a freshman quarterback. Maybe that was the game plan because they were going against a freshman quarterback. That being said, the freshman quarterback lit him up. He threw for, I think it was 439 yards. So if they go with that same game plan, I have to think Trevor Lawrence just rips them apart. Now, it's going to be hard for them to switch up their game plan when it won them the biggest game they've won in quite some time. But I do not know what their game plan is going to be. I don't have a crystal ball. I think if they have the exact same game plan they had last game, Lawrence could have a humongous game here. They're beatable at corner, so Lawrence is okay. I don't know. I'm not going to have a ton of ownership interest in this game personally, but there are spots you want to pick. I think Clemson's wide receivers have the best price of these two teams. That's the spot I would mostly attack. Amari Rodgers, I think at 6.5 is fine. Last time these teams played, Rodgers had 23 fantasy points, whereas Powell had 31. So I think they're probably both a little bit too cheap. Other than that, there are other options. Galloway, the tight end, at 3.8 sees some work. I don't find him that interesting. Ladson has been supposedly coming back for about, seems like 3 months now. Apparently he's optimistic he's going to play. Sure, if he does play, he's a fine option, but who knows how healthy he is because what the hell's been going on there. All right, Notre Dame. Let's start with the running back, Kyren Williams. I think he's a 7.5. That's a decent price. I think he's been a little bit too expensive all year, and now I would argue maybe he should be about the same price as ETN. He's averaged 29.6 DraftKings points in his last 4 games, excluding the game against Boston College where he left injured. He did have 35.8 points against Clemson last time they played, so there is precedent there. Overall, I think with Clemson's defense being a little bit more healthy, with them probably realizing now, I don't know how they didn't realize it the first time out, that stopping Kyren Williams is going to go a long way to winning the game. I don't think he has as big of a game as he did last time, so I don't know how much ownership I will have of him. Ian Book, same thing at 7.9. He's fine, but the volume's not super great. He's fine. This total's around 60. I don't know whether it's going over or under. Like I said, difficult game to call. I'm just going to sit back and watch it. I would think with these two teams seeing each other already once this year, I think if it does go over, I would be surprised if it flew over the total. So I would expect like a 34-31 Clemson win, something like that. Maybe even 30-27 in that range. All right, as far as Notre Dame receiving options, I probably won't have a ton. McKinley has been a beast over his last 5 games. He does have 28 catches for 448 yards and 3 touchdowns. However, all 3 of those touchdowns actually came in only 1 game, and that was his last game out against Syracuse. So he's kind of dependent on the 100-yard bonus, which he's been getting consistently. I'm not sure you can rely on him getting that again here, though. But he's definitely their top option. Skarnick at 5.6. I don't really see how I could get there, but he is their secondary option. Meyer, the tight end, at 3.8, still is too cheap. He does have 12 targets in his last 2 games. I would think they would game plan to have him involved in this one. Avery Davis, I would imagine the speed guy is going to cede reps to Braden Lenzy. That's if Braden Lenzy actually plays. He's been another guy, kind of like Ladson on the other side, where he keeps supposed to be coming back and he never actually plays. He actually suited up the last 2 games. He played a little bit in the Syracuse, but did nothing. I thought he was going to be their best receiving threat once, what's his name, Kevin Austin, wasn't playing. I thought he'd be probably their most productive wide receiver. So there's a chance they're waiting to bust him out and keeping him as like this secret weapon. But I mean, that's just totally gambling at that point. So I guess don't be surprised if Braden Lenzy catches a long touchdown. Don't be surprised if he suits up and doesn't even play. Don't be surprised if he doesn't even make the trip. He's a wild card. All right, Minnesota versus Wisconsin. I won't take too much time on this one. I'm not going to play Minnesota players because Wisconsin has a very good defense. Morgan has had a very disappointing year at 5,000. You might be interested, and then you would check the game logs and you would think, okay, that's why. Ottman Bell at 5.1, he's the only guy I would play, but I say would play, I'm not going to play him. He's playing Wisconsin's great defense. Mo Ibrahim is, I think, the most expensive running back, and he's going against Wisconsin, so he's probably going to get like 25 carries, but I don't know. Let's look at Wisconsin's run game because they're going against a Minnesota rush defense that is allowing an astonishing 6.6 yards per carry. 6.6 yards per carry. Awful. 212 rushing yards per game allowed. So while Wisconsin wants to run the ball. They haven't run the ball effectively this year. Now's their chance. Feel like I kind of keep saying that. But the matchup's too good for me to totally ignore. Jalen Berger at 5,000. If I knew he was going to play, I would play him. However, he's been mysteriously out, and they haven't been giving any reasons why. Looks like he's not listed on the depth chart, so I wouldn't expect him to play. In his absence, I think Nakia Watson becomes the most intriguing back here, especially with his price being at 3.6. He only had 29 yards last time out, but he did have 13 carries, and he did have a touchdown. So if Nakia Watson is a leading Wisconsin running back going against a team allowing 6.6 yards per carry, that's really hard to ignore. I recognize Wisconsin is not what they usually are, so I won't go overboard with this, but I think the price is just too good to pass up. Groshek at 4.4 is also a decent option. He does see a lot of receiving work, hasn't really shown a ton on the ground, and he just doesn't really seem like that kind of back. He's more of a third down back. As far as wide receivers, not really interested, but Minnesota's defense stinks. Ferguson is the target hog, their tight end. He's a target hog at 4.6, so he's decent. And then Jack Dunn, I believe he saw 10 targets last game. He saw a lot of targets out of nowhere. All right, Boise State versus San Jose State. Not a lot of ownership interest in this one for me. Khalil Shakir, wide receivers at 8.2. I don't know if I can pay up that much for him. He's been a beast. He has 24 targets in the last 2 games. Overall, these are just 2 pretty good defenses, man. I mean, San Jose State is allowing only 17.5 points per game, and they're giving up only 5 yards per play. Boise State is also giving up only 5 yards per play. That's pretty damn good. The difference is Boise State's allowing 26 points per game. Now, I think that's a little bit skewed because Boise State put up a ton of points when they played against Boise. So I think that's a little bit skewed. But anyway, this game's just kind of all over the place. C.T. Thomas is the secondary receiver on Boise State, and he's pretty good, but the volume just really has not been trustworthy. You could do worse at 4.4. A quarterback, Bachmeier, at 6,000. Usually I'd see that price with Bachmeier and be interested in him with, decent volume and a pretty talented attack. But, again, he's just done nothing this year. Pretty hard to trust. I don't want to say I'm crossing him off just because he's so cheap, but difficult. As far as the running backs, hard to trust here as well, man. Who knows what's going on with George Halani? This guy was a very, very, very productive freshman running back for them last year. And then this year he's been injured. He came back last game and only had 3 carries. So I would assume he's not healthy. I don't really see why else he'd be getting 3 carries. If I knew he was going to get a full complement of work at 4.8, he would be an auto start. But that's a huge it's a huge question mark, man. I don't know. I'm not sure I could play Van Buren either. He's been productive his last 3 games. He saw 25 carries his last time out. Usually Boise State running backs are gold, but like I said, it's difficult to trust. Who knows how this workload's going to be split. If we do get news, either one of these guys is out, which again, I don't anticipate that. I'm probably playing the other guy, but it's a little rough. All right, San Jose State quarterback Starkel at 6.4. Not super interested in him. They've been kind of rotating Nick Nash in there, backup running back. He gets a lot of running work, kind of like a Wildcat package sort of deal, which makes the wide receivers also a little bit hard to trust. Their 2 top guys are pretty clearly Bailey Gaither and Trey Walker. They're both target hogs. They've been seeing about the same targets lately, And while Gaither has been more productive on the season, I'm not sure he should be a full 1.8K above Trey Walker. Again, probably not much ownership interest here. I think the prices are a little bit cheap on these guys who've been pretty productive this year. But, I mean, Walker's just been kind of an empty target guy. You know, he's getting decent yards, but just not a lot of touchdowns. It's just been kind of meh. Like, maybe you'll get 15 points out of him. Maybe you'll get 12. Not super interested. I think I'm going to talk myself into some Tyler and Evans share, which, man, playing a San Jose State running back is just not really something I ever envisioned myself doing much of. But here we are. I might have some interest. Why? Well, he has 336 rushing yards in his last 2 games and 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games. He's going against Boise, who, while they have a good defense, they are beatable on the ground. They're allowing 183 rushing yards per game. So yeah, that wraps up the slate. As far as like an overall slate goes, I probably won't be playing this one crazy heavy. I'll also be playing Fridays. There's just not a lot of smash spots I see. You know, it just always depends on the slate. But I'll get more thoughts. I'll get an article out. I'll attach that to the video once it's posted, and I'll post it on Twitter as well. Positional overview. I mean, I pretty much already gave my thoughts. Especially with the late Ole Miss news, I haven't really set any lineups based off of that. So I'm not 100% sure where I'm going to go. But I feel like I gave thoughts on who I liked best, so I am not going to go over that twice here. As far as any bets, I did bet Marshall -5 in the Conference USA Championship game. They're playing UAB. UAB wants to run the ball, and Marshall has the number 2 rush defense in the country. I just don't see UAB being able to score much there. So while Marshall is very concerning, they're coming off a rough loss to Rice. I just think over the course of the year they've been much better, and I think they match up well here. So give me Marshall, and they're playing at home. Marshall's great at home, and they're 5-0 against UAB at home. I did take Notre Dame plus 10.5. I'm not sure if these lines are still out here. I haven't checked. I placed these bets earlier in the week to try to get the best line. So if the line has moved too much, I don't recommend playing it. Obviously, I took Notre Dame plus 10.5. I'm just surprised I got that hook where Notre Dame's good defensively, and these 2 teams played once. I recognize Trevor Lawrence wasn't out there. I recognize Clemson might be more of a must-win situation, but I just think these 2 teams are pretty damn close, and we've already seen that. I took Oregon over 62.5, the Oregon USC game, Pac-12 championship on Friday night. I sprinkled a little bit on LSU -77.5 when I saw that Ole Miss news. I just thought the line hadn't adjusted yet, and it might move a few points, so I wanted to get the best of that number, especially if there's going to be some bad weather. All right, so that wraps it up. Thank you for listening. You can find me on Twitter at YonkersCFB, and once again, this was brought to you by thebreakdownsport.com. Give us a look, and best of luck this week.